This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network, my latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. In this episode, I visit with John Fanning. John is a longtime player in the compliance space, and today we visit about his new association with Integrity Risk International and the increased need for robust due diligence during the coronavirus health crisis. I should also note that John is the first Texas A&M Aggie on the podcast. Giggle. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and today you're in for a real treat because we have our first graduate of Texas A&M University, John Fanning. John, as the first Aggie guest on this podcast, an extraordinary big gig'em and welcome.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the welcome, especially coming from Longhorn. So I'm looking forward to talking to you today, and I'm excited to be on the show.
So, John, could you tell the listeners a little bit about your professional background?
Sure, Tom. I as you mentioned, I graduated from Texas A&M. And I was fortunate enough to go to work for a company called LexisNexis many years ago, which was in the online information business. I was working with attorneys at corporate legal departments. And that was about the time that, due diligence and looking at companies, mergers and acquisitions and things like that were really kind of picking up. And, I worked and LexisNexis had a media library as well as a great library of public records. So I worked with a lot of those folks for about 10 years. I went to work for Thomson Reuters, which is probably their premier competitor. You may be familiar with them as Westlaw. Thomson Reuters, it was Thomson West, and then Thomson and Reuters merged. I was there through all of those mergers, and got a lot of experience working with law firms, corporate legal, also with the government, and I lived in Oklahoma for some time. And then I was fortunate enough to go to work for Kroll Compliance. And Kroll was a due diligence investigations firm specializing in FCPA investigations and due diligence, as well as working with cybersecurity risk and risk mitigation at companies. Since then, I've worked with Ethisphere, the purveyors of the world's most ethical companies award, and now I'm working with Integrity Risk International, which was founded by Jim and Tom McQueenie, who actually were the CEO and the chief operating officer of Kroll Compliance when I was there. So familiar faces and folks that I have a lot of respect for. And I've been primarily in sales, but focused on legal compliance and regulatory compliance and governance for the majority of the time I've been in the sales space.
So, John, the reason, and thank you for that, the reason I wanted you to go through that detailed professional history is exactly that. You have been in this space for quite some time. And as you know, I'm a lawyer by professional background. You are not. And so you have seen things from a different perspective than perhaps I've seen them. And that's really led, I think, to you having some interesting insights, having both delivered products and services over the course of your professional career. And that really leads to where we are now in the era of COVID-19. Many companies and countries and localities are in a reopening phase. Some, unfortunately, are stepping back a little bit. But within where we are right now, and we're recording this in early August 2020, why does IRI, Integrity Risk International, and yourself see these types of due diligence services as perhaps even more critical where we are right now?
Yeah, Tom, I think, my experience, as you mentioned, has been kind of being an advocate for the client, trying to find solutions for them, and providing products. And I think I've become very sensitive to the need for, really good due diligence. I've seen companies about to make investments that were headed off because of one news article or something like that. And so I know that there's a lot of value in doing that, even in regular times. But I think, right now, one of the things that we see in the era of COVID-19 is a lot of things are accelerated, and there's added pressure. There's a lot less opportunity for folks to travel, so you don't get the face-to-face meetings, and you're not able to understand the details of the company from on-site visits and other things like that, especially if you're looking at an investment or looking to partner with someone. Second of all, I think there's a lot of criminal enterprises out there that are taking advantage of the situation. They realize that people are at a disadvantage, and they think it's a good time to capitalize on that and try to extract funds from companies and individuals. And then third, I think, economically, there's a lot of opportunities out there for companies to invest in. There's a lot of distressed industries, distressed companies, distressed assets. And so, a lot of the companies are pushing to make some investments and take advantage of the situation and try to get, build their organizations and acquire assets. However, there's a lot of competition, and there's less transparency than there normally would be, or less ability to learn about those. And then I think probably the fourth thing that I've seen out there is also there's a lot of pressure on the supply chain. A lot of companies are under immense pressure, especially in agriculture, food industries, medical supply industries, and their businesses are being forced to maybe go into uncharted territories, maybe partner with companies or suppliers that they wouldn't normally use, but because of the pressure on their supply chain. So I think managing third-party risk requires, a lot more attention, and they need to do it in an economically viable way. Everybody is getting pressure to reduce their cost, but they also want to make sure that they are making informed decisions and have, information that is actionable, that they can take action with. So I think that is probably the emphasis on due diligence right now is even more important because of those challenges that a lot of these companies are facing.
What do you see as three important due diligence technological innovations?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Tom. I think we are at IRI. I think we try to balance between technology and then also having analytical analysts that have eyes on the materials. There are three things that we've really utilized to give the analyst an advantage and help them to build a better report for our customers. One of which is automation, streamlining the complex process of gathering data and analyzing data, and using automation through different tools that are out there has freed up our analysts to focus on more detailed investigation tasks and really diving deeply into sorting through the information. There's another one that you may be familiar with, and I think this is a great tool for any chief ethics and compliance officer out there, is something called link analysis. And link analysis is it's a powerful piece of technology where it turns disparate information into meaningful, knowledgeable, useful information to help them make impactful decisions. It gives you the ability to analyze a large amount of information, of data, using really sophisticated information analytics and digging through the data and then establishing connections being graphical representations. So it actually will link one party to another party and give you a very good idea, particularly in the areas of beneficial ownership, which, the importance of that, especially in the financial sector, gives you a way to visualize the complexities of the ownership structure and to understand better the connections of those people who are part of the organization or the entity. And then probably the third piece that we see a lot of, and there's a lot of talk around, is artificial intelligence, which allows folks to work through piles of documents and do kind of tick box work where they come when it comes to compliance. Researchers are able to analyze volumes and volumes of data, media reports, and pull out the very important things using artificial intelligence. A component of that is natural language processing, NLP, and it does very well at systematically analyzing and unstructured text, and bringing that together and focusing in on the relevant risk. And so our analysts are using all three of those things in order to build better reports. But we also try to make sure we have eyes on the material and that there's someone actually interpreting those results and putting it together into an executive summary that makes it an actionable report. We think there's a balance. You want to use these tools, but you want to make sure that you don't provide the customer with a data dump. You want to have a very succinct analysis and give an executive summary of that. And so those are the areas we've seen a lot of, development and evolution in technology.
John, let me pick up on a point you raised a little bit earlier. Many people think of due diligence only in the FCPA context, and obviously it's much broader than that. You talked about many of the other areas that it's become more critical now. You mentioned supply chain, you mentioned food supply, and a couple of others. But I wanted to specifically ask you about what's the role of due diligence in something called green risk or environmentally sensitive or environmental projects. How do you and IRI see due diligence as playing such a key role in that area?
Companies are certainly being looked at a lot with a lot more scrutiny by investors as to their ESG, environmental sustainability and governance. And so certainly with investors, they want to see that companies are making the right decisions. And so in that market, the green risk is something that is a big consideration as we see destruction of rainforest and things like that in Brazil. Everybody and other environmental infractions around the world, and there's more attention to that. One of the things that investors are looking at in the financial, private equity markets and things like that are, analysis of what's going on with the company. If they've got any litigation or if they've had any issues or if there's any media about problems with that part of their business, if there are environmental concerns. And so one of the things, we see more and more is we're injecting an ESG section into our reports. And you see that with more and more of the due diligence. And when the analysts are looking at this at a higher level, and that is the component that we call kind of the growing focus on green financial crimes. We've actually developed a report around that. And you see more and more providers focusing on that, and also more and more governments and media. And so there's a lot of information out there. We try to gather that and put that as a section of anything we do now. In addition to that, I think we're going to see this grow. I think there's more and more need for that, and investigators have to be more aware of that type of thing as well.
John, we focused a lot of our attention in this podcast on due diligence, but that's only a part of the services IRI provides. Could you detail for us some of the other services you and the company offer?
Yeah, so let me kind of explain a little bit about IRI. I think one of the things that the team there did, first of all, they're headquartered in Reston, Virginia. So they're very close to Washington, D.C. There's a lot of talent there with language capabilities and skills. And they go through a rigorous process of hiring very sharp, very capable individuals. They have an internship program for many of these people while they're in graduate school. They train them rigorously on how to analyze the data, accumulate the data, and they also have built some customized tools from around the world. And so what IRA does is they can look at anything and investigate any type of component, and they're very nimble and they're able to customize these things. Executive background checks is another area that we do a lot of work in. We also have third-party screening where we screen the entities. We do beneficial ownership research into the companies and the ownerships of the organizations. We talked a little bit about the ESG reports and looking at the corporate culture. And then we also participate and do investigations, FCPA, whistleblower investigations, and internal disputes. We've got a great team of analysts. We've got a great team of investigators. And both Jim and Tom, who are the founders of the company, have many, many years of experience doing this. We've got a great network of investigators around the world that we're able to turn to. So those are some of the key areas that we focus on outside of just the due diligence component.
John, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on Integrity Risk International or wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do so?
Sure. Me personally, my email is jfanning@integrityriskintl.com, integrityriskintl.com. But you can also go to our website. It's integrityriskintl.com for integrityriskinternational.com. And then we have a social media channel on LinkedIn, and you can follow us there. And if you go to our website, we actually do a lot of content. We provide a lot of content and news through our blog, and you can sign up for our e-newsletter right at the bottom of our webpage. You can link in and sign up for that and get updates from us on a regular basis.
Well, John, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me. And as we move into, I used to say as we would move into Q3 and Q4, perhaps the situation around COVID-19 might be different. I'm afraid now it may be 2021 or even later, but perhaps I could call upon you to give us an update on where IRI and it's seeing around COVID-19 later in the year.
I'd be happy to, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This is the only B2B podcast which brings clear and sane information for both the compliance professional and the business executive. If I could ask you to do one thing, if you could tell one person about this podcast, I'm trying to get the word out about this most unique podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network. So if you could tell one person about it, send them a copy, send them a link, do something to help me publicize this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. Compliance and Coronavirus is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network, and it appears Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode.